Leaving Christianity, for many people, doesn't feel like walking away from a belief system. It feels like walking away from an entire life investment. Every prayer said, every Sunday spent in church, every relationship formed in that environment, every dollar tithed, every sacrifice made, all of it feels like a deposit into a system that promised eternal reward. Psychologists call this the sunk cost fallacy, the idea that once you've invested so much into something, it feels unbearable to admit it might not pay off. Rationally, the past is gone. Those years, that money, that effort, they can't be recovered. The only question that matters is whether continuing makes sense now. But emotionally, people double down. They stay, hoping to justify the past rather than evaluating the present. This is why so many Christians who wrestle with doubt don't walk away, even when they no longer believe. It isn't just about theology. It's about the unbearable thought that they've spent years, sometimes entire lifetimes, devoted to something that might not be true. The sunk cost makes staying feel easier than leaving. The pressure isn't just internal, it's social. If someone grew up in a church community, that's where their friends are. It's where their support network comes from, where they celebrate milestones, where they mark time through rituals. Walking away isn't just about losing faith, it's about losing belonging. Sociologists note that community bonds are one of the strongest predictors of religious persistence. People stay not because of belief, but because leaving means exile. It means awkward holidays with family, strained friendships, sometimes even divorce or losing custody in religious households. The sunk cost here isn't money or time, it's relationships. When someone starts doubting, they're not just calculating theology, they're calculating, do I want to risk every relationship I have? Will my parents see me differently? Will my spouse still respect me? That's a crushing burden. It's no wonder so many swallow their doubts just to keep their lives intact. There's also the educational and cultural investment. Many Christians spend years studying scripture, memorizing verses, defending doctrine. If you've trained your mind to see the Bible as the ultimate source of truth, questioning it feels like dismantling your own identity. It's not just about discarding beliefs, it's about discarding the intellectual scaffolding that has shaped every thought since childhood. People who leave often describe feeling disoriented, like the ground has vanished beneath their feet. That disorientation is the psychological cost of walking away. And here's the twist. The more someone has studied, the harder it can be. Scholars call this effort justification. The more effort you've put into mastering a system, the more you want to defend it, even if cracks start to appear. That's why pastors and theologians sometimes cling even harder than ordinary believers. They've built their careers, their reputations, their entire self-worth on it. Financial and material costs add another layer. Tithing 10% of income, donating to building funds, supporting missionaries, all of this adds up to staggering sums across a lifetime. To leave is to admit that money may have been wasted, and no one likes to admit financial loss. But the bigger cost isn't money, it's opportunity. Every Sunday in church is a Sunday not spent exploring hobbies, building new skills, or connecting with people outside the faith. Every youth group attended meant a different life experience left behind. When someone considers leaving, they often feel the weight of these missed opportunities. The thought, what else could I have done with my life, becomes overwhelming. Instead of facing that grief, many people choose denial. They keep going, convincing themselves the investment was worthwhile. The sunk cost fallacy keeps them in place because staying feels less painful than admitting the depth of what's lost. Finally, there's the ultimate cost baked into Christianity: eternity. Believers are told from childhood that walking away doesn't just risk social exile, it risks eternal damnation. The doctrine of hell weaponizes the sunk cost fallacy. You've already invested years of belief. Why throw that away and risk infinite punishment? This fear makes leaving feel impossible, even when belief has faded. It's like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing rationally there's no drop, but still feeling vertigo. The threat has been planted so deeply that even doubt doesn't remove it. This is why so many people describe deconversion as terrifying. They know intellectually that hell may not exist, but emotionally, the cost of being wrong feels infinite. That's the most powerful sunk cost of all. One of the most subtle ways the sunk cost fallacy works in Christianity is through ritual repetition. Every prayer, every hymn, every communion, every Sunday school lesson is a small deposit into the system. On their own, they might feel trivial, but across years, across decades, they create the sense of a mountain of investment. Psychologists studying habit formation call this behavioral reinforcement. The more often you perform an act, the more it shapes your identity. People don't just say, I go to church. They say, I am a Christian. That difference matters. The sunk cost isn't just time or action, it's self-definition. When doubts arise, they're not competing against abstract theology. They're competing against years of embodied ritual, standing to sing, kneeling to pray, bowing heads in unison. These anchor belief not in arguments, but in muscle. Memory. To leave feels like betraying not just a worldview, but your own body's habits. That's the invisible weight rituals carry. Another layer comes from family legacy. Christianity is often generational. Parents pass it to children. Grandparents remind them of traditions. Entire family lines are wrapped in it. To step away isn't just personal. It can feel like breaking the chain, dishonoring those who came before. This family investment intensifies the sunk cost. If your grandparents sacrificed to build a church, if your parents tithed faithfully, if your siblings still believe, leaving feels like saying all of that effort was in vain. It's not just your cost, it's theirs. And carrying the burden of wasted legacy is a heavy emotional load. Sociologists describe this as filial loyalty pressure, the idea that loyalty to parents or ancestors can override personal belief. In Christianity, this takes form in phrases like honor your father and mother, or raise your children in the faith. These reinforce the idea that leaving isn't just individual, it's betrayal of family duty. So even when belief fades, loyalty pulls people back in. They may whisper doubts privately, but keep public faith alive, because admitting truth would mean rewriting family history as wasted effort. That's how the sunk cost extends across generations. Education within Christianity deepens the trap. Many people spend childhood in Christian schools, memorize Bible verses, learn apologetics designed to counter every doubt. By the time they reach adulthood, they've poured thousands of hours into training their minds to defend the system. Economists talk about human capital, the skills and knowledge people acquire through education. For many believers, their human capital is steeped in Christian doctrine. They know how to quote scripture, but not necessarily how to analyze philosophy outside it. They can defend creationism, but may lack exposure to evolutionary biology. Leaving means admitting that years of learning were narrow, even misleading. That admission is painful. It feels like realizing you studied the wrong subject for years, only to find the job market doesn't recognize it. The sunk cost of specialized knowledge makes people cling harder. They convince themselves their training must be right, because the alternative is too humiliating to accept that they were miseducated by design. Careers tied to Christianity add yet another barrier. Pastors, missionaries, Christian authors, musicians, their livelihood depends on belief. Walking away would mean not just losing faith, but losing income, status, and identity all at once. This is sometimes called vocational entrapment. People have invested so deeply in a faith-based career that leaving feels impossible. Imagine spending 20 years as a pastor. You know scripture inside out, but you don't have other professional training. You have a family to support. Even if you stop believing, can you afford to walk away? There are countless stories of ministers who stayed in pulpits long after their faith was gone, simply because the cost of leaving was too high. They kept preaching, not out of conviction, but out of necessity. The sunk cost of career created a prison. For lay people, this still applies. Many Christian communities offer jobs within church networks, schools, and charities. Leaving may mean losing those opportunities and being cut off from professional connections. That economic cost reinforces the psychological one. And then there's reputation. Within Christian circles, being known as faithful carries immense social capital. People are trusted, respected, and admired for their devotion. To leave is to lose that identity. Worse, it can mean becoming the opposite, the doubter, the rebel, the disappointment. Humans are deeply social creatures. We crave recognition and fear shame. Religion capitalizes on this by rewarding conformity and punishing dissent. So the sunk cost isn't just about what you've put in, it's about what you stand to lose in reputation if you walk away. This is why some people maintain a public believer, private skeptic split. They keep the outward identity because losing it feels unbearable. They've built too much of their social life on being the Christian to suddenly be the ex-Christian. The sunk cost of reputation makes even those who've stopped believing act as though they still do. So when people ask why someone doesn't just leave if they don't believe, the answer is complex. It's not just fear of hell. It's not just family or money. It's the mountain of sunk costs in ritual, legacy, education, career, and reputation. That's what makes leaving feel impossible. Another powerful reason leaving Christianity feels impossible is cognitive dissonance. Psychologist Leon Festinger described it as the discomfort that arises when beliefs and actions don't align. People hate admitting they might be wrong, especially when they've already committed deeply to a belief system. For a Christian, admitting the faith might not be true means rewriting their entire mental map. Every prayer, every miracle, every moment of conviction would have to be reinterpreted. That's exhausting, even terrifying. It's easier to suppress doubts than to confront that level of reorganization. The sunk cost fallacy feeds this dissonance. Instead of saying I was wrong, people double down. They reinterpret contradictions as tests of faith or reframe failures as part of God's mysterious plan. The more inconsistent the system, the harder they cling, because the alternative, admitting wasted years, feels unbearable. Fear of moral collapse adds another barrier. Christians are taught that without God, morality crumbles, that without Scripture, people become selfish, cruel, and nihilistic. This narrative creates another sunk cost, the belief that morality itself depends on staying. Even when someone begins to doubt the supernatural claims, they hesitate. What if leaving makes me a worse person? What if I become what they warned me about? The cost isn't just eternal damnation, it's the fear of personal corruption. Sociologists studying deconversion find this is one of the most common internal struggles. Former believers describe the first months outside as terrifying, not because morality vanished, but because they'd been told for so long that it would. It takes time to realize morality is human, not divine. Until then, the sunk cost of fearing one's own collapse keeps many trapped. Another factor is the emotional intensity of religious experiences. Many Christians report feeling God's presence during worship, prayer, or life crises. These memories become anchors. Even if doubts creep in, people recall the goosebumps during a hymn or the overwhelming peace after prayer, and they interpret it as proof. Neuroscience explains these experiences as natural. Music, ritual, and group emotion trigger dopamine and oxytocin releases. Stress and relief cycles create powerful feelings of transcendence. But when you've invested years interpreting those experiences as divine, it's hard to let go. The sunk cost here is emotional memory. Walking away means admitting those sacred moments weren't supernatural, just human psychology. And that feels like betrayal of some of the most meaningful experiences in a person's life. For many, that cost is too high. There's also the sheer weight of habit. Belief isn't just ideas. It's daily structure. Wake up and pray, read scripture, attend services, volunteer, tithe. These aren't occasional acts, they're lifestyles. Removing them leaves a void. Humans resist voids. When structure disappears, anxiety rises. This is why people leaving Christianity often describe feeling lost, adrift, or hollow. They've removed the scaffolding without yet building something new. The sunk cost here is routine, the comfort of knowing exactly what to do week after week, year after year. Building new structures takes effort. It requires creativity, experimentation, and patience. Many people, faced with that challenge, retreat back into the familiar habits of faith, not because they believe, but because the emptiness feels worse than the illusion. That's the quiet power of sunk costs in daily life. Finally, there's the social cost of being misunderstood. Christianity frames doubt as weakness, rebellion, or sin. Leaving isn't seen as an intellectual conclusion, it's framed as moral failure. That stigma means that those who step away rarely feel understood by those still inside. This isolation compounds the sunk cost fallacy. People think, if I leave, I won't just lose my community. I'll become their cautionary tale. My story will be twisted into evidence of what happens when faith fails. No one wants their life reduced to a moral warning for others. So many stay silent. They keep attending, keep pretending, just to avoid becoming the villain in someone else's sermon. The cost of being misrepresented, caricatured, or shunned feels heavier than the cost of quietly suppressing doubt. And that's the essence of why leaving feels impossible. The sunk cost isn't only about past effort, it's about the mountain of future loss waiting if you walk away. And when that mountain includes reputation, family, identity, morality, and memory, it's no wonder so many freeze at the edge of departure. Another major sunk cost comes from identity labels. For many, Christian isn't just a belief system. It's the word they've used their entire lives to describe themselves. It shows up on forms, in family introductions, in how they narrate their personal story. Walking away means adopting a new identity, one that may not feel comfortable or clear. Humans are creatures of narrative. We tell ourselves who we are through the labels we accept. Changing a label like Christian to anything else feels like tearing up the script of your life and starting fresh mid-sentence. That uncertainty fuels hesitation. Psychologists studying identity shifts find that even small label changes cause distress. Moving from student to graduate single to married, or employed to unemployed, causes stress, even when the change is positive. Multiply that by the scale of leaving a lifelong religious identity, and the sunk cost becomes overwhelming. The truth is, Christianity doesn't just offer beliefs, it offers a ready-made identity. And when you've invested decades in that identity, replacing it feels almost impossible. Christianity also creates sunk costs through moral purity cultures. In many traditions, strict rules around sexuality, gender roles, and behavior mean people have sacrificed opportunities others take for granted. Dating, sexual exploration, career choices, even clothing options may have been restricted. When someone starts doubting, they don't just face the loss of belief, they face the realization that they gave up experiences unnecessarily. They stayed celibate, suppressed desires, obeyed authority, all for a system they now question. That's a painful reckoning. The sunk cost here is sacrifice. The more someone has denied themselves in the name of faith, the more invested they feel. To admit the system isn't true would be to admit their sacrifices were for nothing, so they double down instead. They convince themselves it must be true, because the alternative is unbearable. Economists describe this as loss aversion. Losses hurt more than equivalent gains feel good. Religion weaponizes that instinct, making people cling harder the more they've given up. It's a cruel irony. The stricter the rules, the harder it becomes to leave. There's also the cultural sunk cost of nationalism tied to Christianity. In many Western nations, Christianity is woven into identity as patriotism, tradition, and civic pride. God bless our country isn't just a slogan. It's a merging of faith with belonging to the nation. Leaving Christianity can then feel like leaving your culture, your heritage, even your country. People raised in regions where Christianity dominates often describe it as the air they breathe. Every holiday, every national anthem, every pledge of allegiance carries religious undertones. The sunk cost here isn't theological at all, it's cultural comfort. To step outside Christianity means to feel like a foreigner in your own culture. That alienation is another heavy cost, and it keeps people tied even when belief itself has evaporated. This is why so many people say they no longer believe but still call themselves cultural Christians. They want the belonging without the belief, because the cost of total separation feels too high. We also have to consider fear of regret. The thought that leaving might one day feel like a mistake keeps many frozen. What if they leave, build a new life, and then face tragedy? The voice in the back of their mind says, what if the faith was true after all? What if leaving was the worst mistake of my life? This fear is amplified by Christian teachings about apostasy. Passages warn that leaving the faith is unforgivable, that once you walk away, you cannot return. That doctrine magnifies regret before it even happens. It tells believers that if they ever leave, their future selves will face catastrophic consequences. Psychologists describe this as anticipated regret, the fear of future remorse that shapes present decisions. It's a powerful motivator. People avoid change not because they're happy, but because they dread regretting it later. Christianity leverages that instinct to keep people in place. So even when doubts are strong, fear of future regret keeps many from acting. They'd rather endure quiet dissatisfaction than risk catastrophic regret. Finally, there's the ultimate sunk cost of time. Many people don't start doubting until middle age or later. At that point, they've spent decades inside Christianity. The thought of starting fresh feels impossible. They tell themselves, it's too late. I've already lived most of my life this way. Why change now? This resignation is another form of sunk cost. Instead of evaluating whether leaving would improve the years ahead, people dwell on the years already spent. They frame leaving as waste rather than as liberation. That mindset keeps them locked in place, even when belief has faded. But here's the irony. The sunk cost fallacy traps people by making them focus on the past, even though the past cannot be changed. What matters is the present and the future. Yet, religion's weighty history of investment makes the future feel unreachable. And so people stay, not because the beliefs hold up, but because the cost of admitting the past is gone feels heavier than continuing in the present. That's the cruelest trick of all. The sunk cost fallacy doesn't just trap individuals in Christianity. It also explains why entire communities resist change. Churches themselves are built on centuries of investment, buildings, traditions, doctrines, reputations. When individuals leave, they're not just facing personal costs, they're pushing against collective costs. Congregations will sometimes fight fiercely to preserve outdated practices, not because they're effective, but because they've poured resources into them. The stained glass, the pews, the hymnals, all represent investments. To admit change would mean admitting those resources might no longer serve their purpose. That communal sunk cost pressures individuals to stay, to keep funding the system, to keep validating the institution's past choices. It's important to recognize this isn't always malicious. It's human. People resist letting go of what they've built, even when it no longer fits reality. But the result is the same. Individuals who doubt feel trapped by the weight of everyone else's investment, not just their own. There's also the sunk cost of emotional loyalty. Many believers describe Christianity as a relationship with God. They've spoken to this figure in prayer, cried to them in pain, thanked them in joy. To walk away means admitting that the one they loved and trusted may never have been there at all. That sense of betrayal is profound. It's like realizing you've been writing letters for decades to someone who never existed. The grief is real, even if the relationship wasn't. And because grief is so painful, many people choose denial instead. They continue praying, continue worshipping, because facing the void feels unbearable. Psychologists studying attachment note that humans bond with figures of imagination as strongly as with real people. Children form attachments to imaginary friends. Adults grieve fictional characters. In religion, the imagined being is tied to identity and survival. That makes the emotional sunk cost almost impossible to overcome. Leaving requires not just intellectual honesty, but grieving a relationship that was central to life. That grief keeps many from even starting. The sunk cost fallacy also explains why deconversion often comes in stages, not sudden breaks. People test the waters, skipping church occasionally, questioning doctrine privately, exploring alternate communities. Rarely do they leap in one go because the costs are too high to absorb all at once. This slow transition is a way of managing sunk costs incrementally. Instead of facing all the loss at once, people allow themselves partial withdrawals. They stop tithing, but keep attending. They stop attending, but keep praying. They stop praying but still identify as Christian. Each step reduces the cost until the final break feels survivable. It's like peeling away layers of an onion, painful, tear-inducing, but gradual. Psychologists call this cognitive unfreezing, loosening the grip of old systems bit by bit. Understanding this helps explain why leaving feels drawn out, exhausting, and non-linear. The sunk costs don't vanish at once. They have to be dismantled carefully. What's striking is that when people do finally leave, many describe an odd mix of grief and relief. Grief for the sunk costs, the years, the sacrifices, the relationships, but relief that they no longer have to keep investing. Relief that they can stop pouring energy into something that no longer fits. This duality highlights why the sunk cost fallacy is so powerful. Until the moment of leaving, people frame their past investment as a reason to stay. After leaving, they can finally see that the past is past, and that staying would only create more loss. Economists explain this shift as cutting losses, the recognition that past investment shouldn't dictate future choices. It sounds simple in theory, but in practice it requires courage. Courage to face regret, courage to accept grief, courage to risk alienation. That's why leaving Christianity feels impossible for so long, because courage must outweigh sunk cost. And when it finally does, the sense of freedom can be overwhelming. People often describe it as seeing the world with fresh eyes, or as stepping into reality after years of shadow. The costs remain, but the future becomes open again. Ultimately, the sunk cost fallacy explains why leaving Christianity feels impossible, but it also explains why staying doesn't solve the problem. Every day invested in something you no longer believe only deepens the eventual cost. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes. The key insight is this: sunk costs are gone no matter what. The money tithed, the hours prayed, the years spent, none of it can be reclaimed. The only question is what to do with the time ahead. That's where the fallacy traps people, by making them think the past dictates the future. It doesn't. For those who do leave, the challenge is reframing. Instead of seeing the past as wasted, they see it as experience, as something that shaped them, even if it wasn't true. That reframing transforms sunk cost into learning. It softens grief and opens space for growth. And that's the final truth. Christianity feels impossible to leave because the sunk costs are immense: personal, social, cultural, emotional. But the moment someone recognizes that those costs are gone no matter what, leaving becomes possible. The past cannot be changed, but the future, finally, is theirs to build.